welcome to the Surrogate Buzz. My name is Rebecca Deegan. Today I am with Brian Klein, one of our attorneys, and he's going to tell us what we need to know about the legal side of surrogacy, what intended parents and surrogates need to know, just an informative conversation for us and for you guys to understand kind of just some legal background, maybe some questions that you might have that this will help you kind of navigate the process. But before we get started, don't forget to like, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and leave a comment. This definitely helps anybody who's looking into surrogacy and the information that we're going to provide today. So without further ado, Brian, thanks for being with us today.
My pleasure. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. I feel like the legal conversation comes up quite a bit, obviously, when we're meeting intended parents. Probably the surrogate part, like maybe when they're further down the line, but I think just kind of clearing up any questions or concerns they might have before getting into this process. And then obviously once they move along. But before we kind of get into the legal side of surrogacy, what brought you to surrogacy and the legal part of surrogacy?
Yeah. Well, it kind of began as a stroke of good luck in a sense. My father was a practitioner, and when I graduated from law school back in 2011, I sort of got to dabble in his work and then compare and contrast that to some of the other job experience that I had had. And just initially kind of quality of life, I discovered that the fertility space, the sort of environment around it, the fact that it's collaborative, the fact that you're ultimately helping people reach goals instead of kind of fighting and breaking things apart. It was just, yeah, it just ended up being attractive to me, and it was just kind of right place, right time. I had the good luck of having somebody that could bring me on and train me and give me the platform to grow, and I just kind of went with it. That's how it started.
Yeah, because your dad was attorney for many years, right? Your whole childhood, I would assume.
Yeah, starting in, I guess, like he says his first case was in 1987.
Okay.
And to be honest, when I was younger, I wasn't that interested in his work. I didn't really.
Sounds about right.
Yeah, I didn't even really know what surrogacy was until law school. It was like it wasn't really
Okay.
something that we talked about at home. I knew he was a lawyer, but it just wasn't. It wasn't something that I think I focused on. I just kind of lived my life. I was a kid, and
Yeah.
it was just more once I got into the career, and I got to see and compare and contrast what it was like to be an attorney. You have this idea of what it's like, but then in practice, it's of course very different than what
Yeah.
it sounds like it's going to be like in school. And I just found that the universe of litigation didn't fit my personality style. I don't like fighting with people. I don't like the egos. I'm more of I think I fit better with kind of project-based collaborative work. And that to me was the main driver. And then it just, it happened to be at a time where it was a growing industry. And so it availed an opportunity, and, it's been great ever since.
I love that. I love that. So, how is surrogacy law different from family law? Because did you dabble in any family law before? And
No, I
okay.
mean, the way my dad would always describe it was family law is anti-family law because it's basically breaking up families, divorce, fighting, and surrogacy is building a family. It is the most intentional form of family building. I would say probably adoption too, but
Yeah.
it is just a very intentional form of family building. It takes a lot of planning. It takes a lot of collaboration. It takes a team. And I think, there's a lot of differences because I think traditional family law is a lot of litigation, whereas surrogacy law is very much just contract based.
Yeah. That's a good way to put it. I never thought of it as anti-family law, but yeah, that's a good way to put it. I would say, because, obviously intended parents will come to us and be like, oh, well, I already have an attorney or a lawyer that does family law or whatnot. And it's like, okay, no, we want to make sure that they do, surrogacy law because it is, in my eyes, much different. So I would think you probably feel the same way.
Yeah, I think it's different. It's a different personality type. It's a different skill set. And just like anything, you can hire attorneys to do the work, but there's a lot of nuance in this that you don't necessarily want the litigator's mindset to be involved in a surrogacy arrangement.
Mm-hmm. Well, and you're drafting contracts for surrogacy every day, so you yourself are like, I mean, this is like second nature, right? You know what benefit package is and what to put in there. Where I think maybe the family law piece might change that.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to learn. There's industry norms, there's insurance questions, and so if you're just jumping into anything for the first time, I would say it would be ill-advised to take on a surrogacy matter without having somebody mentor you because there's just a lot that you're never going to know.
Yeah, right. So surrogacy lawyer, not
Right.
family lawyer. So what is the biggest misconception that people have about surrogacy contracts?
The biggest, I would say the maybe this isn't the biggest misconception, but I think a misconception about surrogacy contracts in general is that my theme of surrogacy, I think this kind of goes into the larger, my philosophy on surrogacy is the contract is important, but this is such a human process that
Right.
if you view everything through the lens of a legal agreement, you're going to have a difficult arrangement because I think the contract is important because of course it lays down the foundation of the agreement. It establishes that you're going to be the parent of the child ultimately. But if you view this transaction with this other human being as one of a contract, then you're inevitably going to have, I think, conflict with that person because the imperfection of surrogacy is that it's a human process. It is just so deeply human.
Yeah.
And when you try to approach this from an attorney's mindset, or if you just view this as like a rigid contract, I think you're going to find that it's a difficult lens through which to view ultimately this relationship.
Right. Because you're taking a human and making it contractual versus a human interaction or yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things. Obviously, we do this every day, so there's a
Yeah.
lot of things we see that might be contractual or maybe wasn't in the contract, where maybe there was a little bit of a gray area where we need to work around. But I'm with you. I definitely see that on the agency side, where it's like contract, contract, contract is like, okay, but this person's also like carrying your baby and they're a person, and obviously they still have their own decisions to make and things like that. But the contract is important because it says what you want and what they're willing to do. But yeah, I think that's hard for people just because the trust, the control, like all of those
Right.
things, right? They come into play when they're thinking about this process or signing a contract.
Yeah, and I think what I mostly mean by that is, of course, people sign a contract, they're meant to comply with the terms of the
Yeah.
agreement. But if your approach is that, whenever a conflict arises, you hold up a contract in someone's face and you say you're supposed to be doing this, you're going to have a bad relationship, right? And so that's just not how people like to be dealt with,
Yeah.
right? So there's nuance to it. It's a process of getting to know people and building a relationship, building a communication style, and to the best of your ability, not referencing the contract as a authority point if you don't have to, because I think there's just a lot better ways to deal with human beings than to point out that they're violating the terms of your agreement. And of course, it's not to say that you may not have to do that, but I think that's when I say the biggest misconception is that this is how people view this, I'd say this is the biggest fundamental flaw,
Yeah.
I think, of style of approaching this is that you have to in the end respect that you've got a human being on the other side, and it's a long process. I mean, you're in this for
Very
a
much so.
long time, and sometimes you have to value the relationship more than you do the $25 that you feel like you're not supposed to pay.
Right. And it comes down to communication too, which is the biggest piece of surrogacy, where it's like communicate. If you have a good communication with your surrogate, obviously that's why we do a group psych session, and all of these things are set up for that reason, to make sure everything goes smoothly. So yeah, I think a lot of times the communication breaks, and maybe that's where the contract thing may come into play. So let's talk about like PBO, which is parental birth. What should intended parents understand about establishing the parental rights before birth, which obviously might happen after birth as well? Just to state.
Yeah. I mean, so ultimately the North Star of our process is we need to get you a court order as the parent. We somehow, some way, we need a judge somewhere in some jurisdiction to recognize that you're the parent of this baby and that the surrogate has no parental rights. And this all really begins at matching, because there are different characteristics about matches that might have different outcomes depending on where ultimately the surrogate lives and sometimes where the clinic is located or where
Yeah.
the parents reside. So our job is as lawyers is to help make sure that when you're matched with the surrogate, she lives in a jurisdiction that's suitable for you. And then in the end, what we're going to do is, in some form or fashion, we're going to present evidence to a court that we had this agreement, that those things that were contemplated by this agreement, that there was an embryo transfer, took place, it worked, she's pregnant, and the only plausible explanation for the fact that she's now pregnant is that your embryo transfer was successful and that you're the parent of this child. So that will happen in a court somewhere through some process, usually just by filing paperwork.
Okay.
And it's done in advance of the birth in most states. And so we call that a pre-birth order because we're getting a judge to sign off on a court order recognizing that you're the parent in advance of the child's birth. And then there are a few states where we have to wait until the baby's born in order to finalize parental rights. It typically happens very quickly, but these are just basically procedural differences and state law differences.
Yeah. And what's how much would you put on pre-birth versus post-birth? Because obviously this question comes up a lot, especially early on, right? Like, well, where's a surrogate located? Is she in a pre-birth order state or post-birth order state for intended parents who've done, their education on that? But, would you say that it's better, worse, neither? Like, what are your thoughts around that?
I don't think it really matters. I
Okay.
mean, so the caveat is about 80% of my clients are international. So
Okay.
sometimes we need a specific process in order for them to facilitate their return home and register the baby and have that all go smoothly. So save for that, it's not that important. Honestly, it's kind of a matter of convenience. It is nice to be able to show up to a hospital and say, I am recognized as the parent of the child. It's over. We don't have to deal with lawyers. But if you zoom out a year from the birth date, you're not going to remember that it was a pre-birth or a post-birth order.
Yeah.
So what I advise people is find the best human being that you can to be your gestational carrier. And if she happens to live in a post-birth order state, sure, take that into consideration, but don't use that as a pre-filter. Because if that's the first thing that you're filtering for is it has to be a pre-birth order state, you're missing the point. I mean, the point is you have to find a good, reliable human being to partner with. And if you choose these, what are ultimately unimportant factors, I think in the end as pre-filters, you're going to end up making the pool smaller. It's going to take longer to get matched, et cetera. So ultimately it's the parent's decision, but will it impact the process in a meaningful way? No, I don't think so. It's just a matter of, I would say, inconvenience to have to deal with a lawyer once a baby's born, because you just want to enjoy the moment. Of course, that's understandable, but you also, I think in the end, you don't have to worry that you're not going to be recognized as the parent. It's just in the end, it's procedural, right? So how you get there isn't so important as the person that you match with and the process in general.
And for post-birth orders, is there something put into place that says something before they're born? Obviously, if they show up to the hospital that says that they're the parents, it's just not done in a court system?
Yeah, I mean, so obviously you have the contract. You can have powers of attorney in place or temporary guardianships so that you can have that peace of mind and you can have the documentation at the hospital. And then in those states where it's post-birth, it's usually like a week or two.
Okay, that was going to be my next question. Yeah, what's the time frame around that? Because I think it sounds scary, right? Like, oh my gosh, I'm not the parent until after they're born. Like, what's going to happen? The surrogate's on the birth certificate. Like, how does this work? Kind of thing. Where if it's not really a big deal, then I think you advising, just find the great surrogate. Because I do tell intended parents that, you want to find the right surrogate. What if she's in Nevada and she's not in California? Are you, would you be okay with that? And at the end of the day, it really doesn't matter. I mean, I feel like a lot of the travel piece right now is kind of happening everywhere. So, but that is a big question we get. And I would say a lot of intended parents do try to stick to post-birth order.
Pre-birth,
state.
probably.
Pre-birth. Yeah, pre-birth.
Yeah, understandably. But I think it's just a matter of education, and it's a matter of, if you're doing research on the internet, right, you're going to find that you're going to be told, go to California, go to a state with statutory protections, go to a state where it's a pre-birth order. But theoretically, that all makes sense, but you're missing the larger point, which is we're gonna match you in a state where we have a legal pathway, and certainly you have your own risk tolerance and you have your own preferences, and those are not to be discounted. But my point is, take take the full picture. Don't just pre-filter for things that in the end are a minor inconvenience, because that's not the main point, right? So that's how I view it, is you're giving yourself a better chance for a better surrogacy arrangement if you're more open-minded. And then ultimately, yeah, take the full picture into consideration. And if something about that state makes you uncomfortable, then that's your prerogative. Move on.
Yeah, or talk to you about it so that you can advise them if it's going to be an issue or not, right?
Yeah.
Or a time frame issue too. Okay, what legal protections exist for specifically for surrogates during the process?
Well, I guess one big misconception I think in surrogacy is that it doesn't get required, or it doesn't get asked that much anymore, but it still gets asked. It's like, does the surrogate ever want to keep the baby? Well, when I talk to surrogates, the opposite question comes up: am I ever going to get stuck with a baby that I didn't want?
Yeah, I was gonna say that's
right?
usually the question.
Right.
Yeah, like
So,
I don't want the baby.
Yeah, so I always tell intended parents that the surrogate wants to be as protected as you do. I promise you. And so I would say that is the most fundamental, important legal protection for the surrogate, is that ultimately she is protected in that she is not going to be foisted on, with another child that she didn't want. That's the whole purpose of this agreement, is to make sure that she doesn't take on the burden of having to care for a child that she didn't intend to care for. And so that's the first. I mean, aside from that, all of the financial risks relating to the surrogacy, specifically medical insurance, et cetera, are passed on to the intended parents through these contracts. That is just the industry standard. The parents have to buy health insurance, and then that health insurance protects them from the risk of financial loss for medical expenses. And the surrogate takes none of it, right? She's basically saying, I'll get the insurance that you're asking me to get. I'll go to the medical provider that's covered by the insurance that we both agree on. And to the extent that there are medical bills that are not paid, that's your problem.
Yeah.
Right? That's how it works.
Yeah.
I mean, there are many, but I mean, I guess those are some of the key ones.
Yeah. Those are some of the important ones that definitely come up. So what rights do surrogates maintain during pregnancy?
So this, I mean, there are, I would say fundamentally, a key to surrogacy, and this is going to be reflected in some of the statutory law, especially some of the new states that are passing laws, are making it clear that the surrogate has and maintains autonomy over her body and her decisions. And so how that gets reflected in a contract can differ from state to state. But in the end, I mean, I think that an important lesson for everybody is that the surrogate is the patient. It is her body. She is the one that goes to the doctor, and she gets to make the medical decisions that affect her health. And of course, there's a contract that gives the intended parents rights over those decisions that impact the health of the child. But in the end, the person who has to consent to any medical procedure or any medical protocol is the surrogate. And so that will ultimately be within her control. The contract cannot undo that. The doctor will always view the surrogate as the patient and the person that has full autonomy over the decision-making process. And then the contract outlines the guidelines through which she's supposed to consider the intended parent's request, et cetera.
And what she agrees to or doesn't agree to.
Correct.
But I would think that this is a conversation that probably comes up for you, like, okay, well, how do I guarantee that I can make decisions for my child, right? Are these?
Yeah.
I mean, I would say those are that would be a normal, scary situation where an intended parent's like, okay, it's her body, she makes a decision, but we also want her to do X, Y, and Z. So how do we actually do that?
Yeah, well, I mean, in practical terms, right? If the doctor comes in and recommends a course of treatment, it is ultimately going to be the surrogate to decide, yes, I will do that. No, I will not. I don't consent, or I do consent. The contract will never replace the surrogate as the source of consent, right? So the parents can't come in and hold up their contract and say, no, this question is actually for us. This is our child.
Right.
So ultimately, this is the course of conduct that we want to follow. So fundamentally, that is a legal protection that exists in these contracts, and that's how surrogates are protected with respect to all of these decisions. Now, how does that play out? I mean, I think in the practical sense, this goes back to, again, the theme, which is you've got to trust the human being that you work with, because in the end, you have a contract, yes, but the person on the other side of that agreement has to be on board with this process, and you have to have a relationship of trust, because if you and this comes down to matching, you have to have conversations about these
Conversations, absolutely.
things. And ultimately the surrogate can face legal consequences for violating the agreement, but those are secondary and will come later to her primary right to control her body and make decisions about her health.
And those are constant conversations throughout the journey, right? I mean, it's like, hey, what if this comes up? Or maybe something comes up that maybe wasn't in the agreement, or maybe something, that nobody was expecting. So I think that's just constant conversation and just communication that you need to have with your surrogate.
Yeah. I mean, this whole, like I said, this whole process is a relationship,
Yeah.
right? I mean, you are trusting. I mean, there's really nothing like surrogacy in many ways, right? It is
Absolutely.
it is a leap of faith. It is a relationship that you are putting a lot of trust into a human being. And I think from the parent's perspective, it takes a lot of bravery. It takes a lot of faith in this process. And from the surrogate's perspective, you are taking on a substantial responsibility, right? You are carrying, you're making decisions for a person that doesn't exist, bringing a child into the world. And in my view, you owe it to that future child to do everything that you have signed up for, right? Which is to follow your doctor's instructions and foster an environment that's going to give this child a good chance of having a healthy life.
Right. And have a relationship with the parents that
Yeah.
you're having a baby for. So it is. I'm with you. I don't think that there's anything like surrogacy. I think it's amazing in so many ways, but there's a lot that goes into it that I don't think a lot of people understand.
Yeah, it's a spectacular display of the human experience, really.
Yeah.
I mean, it encapsulates everything about what it's like to be a person, and it distills it into this really important arrangement. And it's relationship, it's communication, it's how you deal with trust, it's how you deal with conflict. It forces you to really, I think, face a person, face a relationship in a way that is unlike anything else. You are. It's not a work relationship. It's not a business relationship. It is like, it's I don't know. I mean, there's just nothing like it to me. So it's hard to define it in terms, but to me, it's something that it's amazing how well it works out.
Yeah.
I mean, it really does. I mean, the like all of this is to say, I think last year we had 700 plus parentage orders where we're having people having kids, and
Yeah.
the process works, but it is ultimately an exercise in trust and a really complex process and a really complex emotional process for people.
I was going to touch on that too, like the fact that we do so many cases a year, and the fact that there are so many willing women out there willing to have a baby for somebody else. I mean, that's really incredible. And that it does, for the most part, go pretty smoothly every day. So we could be.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think of the women that are surrogates, it is pretty incredible, because, ultimately there are these asymmetric risks that people take. The surrogate is putting her family's on the line here, because pregnancy is not guaranteed, and she is risking her life to help this family. And that is a true statement, right? And ultimately it is, it should not be taken for granted. And then, the parents take the asymmetric risk of the finances, because ultimately they are responsible for all of the costs that are associated with this process and the uncertainty that arises. And, I think that is the challenge that the parents generally face. And, the surrogates, on the other hand, are making this great sacrifice and, ultimately have this great responsibility that comes with it.
So to touch on kind of further about the contract with the surrogate, so obviously medical and termination clauses are a big topic. Obviously, we talk about that beforehand with matching, like you mentioned. Like, these are conversations that need to be had prior to, right? We don't want to match someone who doesn't feel the same about these But so how do you like advise people, or how does that come up obviously during the contract phase, um, to help the process go a little bit smoother? Or is there anything that comes up that you see that might affect that?
I mean, the topic of termination of a pregnancy is always fundamental to the matching process. So,
Mm-hmm.
as you very well know, that is core to finding a suitable match. You
Yeah.
have to have people that are aligned. You have to make sure that everybody talks about this, talks it through. Everyone's on the same page. And the the way that I talk to intended parents about this is that it kind of comes back to the conversation that we had earlier, which is the surrogate is the sole source of consent. So the contract is not going to force a person to terminate a pregnancy. It is, in essence, it is her decision no matter what, even if it's written in the agreement. And so you have to just grapple with that, which is, I think that takes a moment.
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
it takes a moment for people
Yeah.
to accept that they don't have control over that, but then also to trust the process, because the surrogates that go through this process will have had this conversation many times, right? They're going to have had it with you. They're going to have had it with their attorney, with the psychologist, with the intended parents, maybe again in a group session.
Yeah.
And it's not something that gets glazed over. I mean, it is, I mean, fortunately, it doesn't happen that often. But when it does, we all hope and expect that it will be handled as it was contemplated by the agreement. And so, so far in my career, it always has. But I think that, the goal in the contract is to make sure that what is written in the agreement reflects the understanding of the parties. And if there is, during that conversation, any doubt about it, I always encourage them to say, like, the contract is what it is, but make sure that you feel comfortable with what she says she's comfortable with, because
Yeah.
that's ultimately the most important thing.
Right. And we always state when, they're matching, even on the match, obviously this is already decided based off of her profile, but when we were meeting and we're all in a group session, trying to see if the match is going to go through, it's like, hey, this is going to come up in your legal contract in a few months. And like, we never want somebody to not understand what they're agreeing to, or you guys matching and then later on down the line finding out that that's not indeed the case. And, obviously those aren't easy things to talk about. Like, nobody wants to talk about terminating their child, and no surrogate wants to terminate a baby that obviously doesn't have a medical condition or whatever the reason around the termination is needed. But I think just having very clear conversations about it and just everybody understanding the process is very helpful.
Yeah, I mean, that's the whole shooting match. You really have to be on the same page.
Yeah.
And with all the testing and everything, obviously these things are few and far between.
Right.
But I think that's definitely one of the challenges of surrogacy in general, is that ultimately I think everybody, the bad thing's not going to happen to me, right? That's how people go through life.
Yeah, exactly.
So you really have to sit with those difficult things, and I think that's why those conversations are important. And you really have to imagine, all right, if this does happen, am I going to be comfortable with it? And I think the like you said, surrogates, generally speaking, their mindset is not that yeah, whatever, I don't really care. I mean, of course, nobody wants to go through that experience,
Yeah.
but I think the framework that I hear this communicated is, this may not be the decision I would make for my family, but I recognize I'm not the one that's going to carry the child. And so I'm not the one that's going to raise the child.
Yeah.
And so if this is what the parents want, I'm willing to do that.
That's exactly what they say.
Yeah.
Yeah. A lot of times that's what they say. But yeah, I think you do have to take yourself as a surrogate out of that picture and say, well, yeah, obviously I have to go through this. This is my body and I have to like live with the fact that I'm terminating. But like at the end of the day, this isn't, years of medical issues or something that I have to live with the child, right? And like you said, it is very low. It is at like less than 2% or something that I think they say. And I mean, we typically don't see it very often, which is a good thing. But
I would say much less than 2%, thankfully. No, I mean, I've
Yeah.
only had like less than maybe 10 in my career, 15, and I've done 10,000 surrogacy
Yeah.
cases, so
yeah.
very low.
Yeah, that's good. Those are good percentages. So what's one legal mistake that you wish intended parents and surrogates avoided?
It's going to be, I wouldn't call it, we'll call it purely legal mistake would be when people get matched and they didn't talk to lawyers up front and the match is not appropriate for the state law. So
Okay.
this happens where It doesn't happen that much, but sometimes the agencies don't have an understanding of what they're setting up. I'm not saying this is SAI. This is, there's 500 agencies.
Yeah.
And not all of them are equal. And so they'll present a match to us where the parents in that state have to be married. And now everybody's understandably upset because
Well,
they've
yeah.
spent 3 months and a bunch of money. And now the lawyer's saying, this isn't going to work. Do you guys want to get married? And, things like that will come up. So I would say fundamentally a legal mistake is make sure that before you're matched, you understand the legal process that you're about to go through in that state so that you don't set yourself up for failure. So yeah, I mean, that's probably the most common thing that would happen.
Yeah, that's why sometimes if there is something unique like that, I'm like, let me text Brian real quick and see, like, hey, is this gonna work? This couple with this person's genetics, because obviously the genetic piece is
Yes.
another add to that. Like sometimes intended parents use embryos that aren't either genetics, right? So
Right.
that also plays a fact in if they can get parentage order, right?
Correct.
In that state, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes it could be residence, it could be marital status, it could be the genetic link. So all those things have to line up for a particular jurisdiction. And, it's a lot. There's a lot of rules. And so it's always a good idea to just verify with the lawyer to make sure so that you're not set back months and a bunch of dollars.
Yeah. And so that is heavily weighted on the agency and the intended parents, right? Because the surrogate probably doesn't really know much about the legal process or if that's going to work or not. So would you say the same for them avoiding the mistake for the surrogate, or would there be a separate one for the surrogate?
I think the challenge for the surrogates is that through no fault of their own, this is their first time going through this process.
Yeah.
And oftentimes they don't know all of the things that are material to the match. And so maybe their spouse is in the military and they have prospective move orders that are on the horizon, and they forgot to disclose that because they never even really contemplated how important their specific location was.
Yeah.
So I think it's a little bit trickier maybe from the surrogate's perspective because a lot of the facts about her life are important for this process and important for the match. And, that could be things like her health insurance, how she has health insurance, her job, where she lives, what her future plans are, what her marital status is. So that is going to require, I think, the agency's guidance,
Yeah.
but not having full vetted conversations to unearth all of these potential issues is a potential problem because, ultimately it can impact her time and her efforts because, let's just imagine, and this has come up, right? She's separated, and
This is going to be my question. Yeah.
yeah. So right, she in her mind she's separated, but even though she hasn't lived with her ex-partner for 5 years, they never actually filed for a divorce. And then we say, well, is this individual going to be willing to sign off on the documentation? And it's like, oh, I never had that conversation. It's not something that I want to bring up, and so that can be an issue. So I think that those are I don't know if I just want to call it a mistake, but those are the things that you learn that she wouldn't have any reason to know until she's educated on it. But those are the kinds of ultimately mistakes that affect legal.
So that is a very common thing that comes up, I would say, the separation thing.
Yeah.
Because it is very gray, where it's like, okay, I'm not divorced. I'm not technically married, even though I am by law married, but I'm separated and I don't have a relationship with my ex and we haven't been together, but nothing has been filed in the court. So how do you work around that?
So, I mean, in some states you can.
Yeah.
In some states, the law is black and white. If you are married, that person must be a party to the gestational carrier agreement. And so if she lives in one of those states, either he signs off on it or not. In other states, just depending on risk tolerances and, it's always best to get this individual to sign.
Yeah.
And that is, I think most people's approach is that the attorneys want that individual to sign so that we protect everybody from future claims. So I would say for purposes of public education, that's the gold standard.
And would a legal separation be valid if you were legally separated? I mean, I would say a lot of people don't always file for legal separation, right? Like, we're separated, we're going to go through a divorce. Why do that? But would that work in an instance for signing a contract without their partner on?
I mean, it's going to be state
Oh,
by
okay,
state.
it's gonna state.
But
Okay.
yeah, I mean, like when you're legally separated, we're talking about you have a judgment entered by the court that recognizes your status as being legally separated.
Gotcha. Okay. So as an agency, this should be a box that should be checked, and we should know prior to if it's legal or not, or if we can get this person to.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's the follow-up question to I'm single is, have you ever been married? And if so, have you finalized your divorce? And if so, do you have proof from a court that that judgment has been entered?
Or understand that the person you were married to could be part of this contract.
Right.
And know that you're getting all this money. Because I think that's probably where it comes down to, is probably a money situation.
Yeah. I mean, I certainly this individual doesn't want to be the parent of the child.
Correct.
But yeah, the risk is that theoretically they use this process as leverage.
Correct.
I've never seen it, knock on wood, but
yeah, I haven't either, but I was just curious because that does come up when matching, well, is she married, or has she ever been married, or, and a lot of times it comes up from the intended parents, not necessarily even the attorney, but, good things to know prior to getting there. Cause like you said, it's like 3 months down the line. So nobody wants to have a med screen and a psych screen and have legal fall through. I feel like at that point we're like, okay, yay, we're getting to a transfer.
Yeah, I think the legal goes really well when there are no surprises.
Yeah.
So the more information that we know about one another, and the more that all of the agreements that have been reached prior to lawyers just becomes kind of a reflection of what this document describes.
Yeah.
It makes the process so much better. I think the way I view our role in a perfect setting is we're just putting into writing what you've already agreed upon. And we're introducing some new concepts because there's going to be things that you just wouldn't have talked about. There are industry norms that we're reflecting in this agreement. But that makes for happy people. And you want, the lawyer's job, I think the intangible side of the lawyering is that I think is personality based, is our job is to help facilitate a process that allows you to enjoy each other's match as much as you did before you dealt with lawyers.
Right.
Right? Because lawyers can really mess things up. So, and this is why I think the litigator's approach is not the right mindset to surrogacy contracts, because certainly I could, if I had that mindset, I could try to win everything. I could say, let's do this, let's see if we can get away with this. Let's
change this.
Right.
Yeah.
And then the surrogate's attorney is going to see it and go, wow, this contract is not industry's norms. And your parents are asking you to accept a lot of terms that are outside of what is typical. And who's going to get blamed? Not the lawyer, the parents are, right? The surrogate's going to go, these parents are not treating me fairly. Why are they why are they asking for all these things that are not standard? And certainly it's the parents' prerogative to make those kinds of requests. But I think the lawyer's job is to help the intended parents understand this is how it's going to be communicated to the surrogate. And this is what her attorney is going to tell her is the industry standard. And so if we can help you avoid unnecessary conflict, I think we've done our job. Because in the end, again, like you want to start off day zero of having signed the agreement really excited about the match. And what I always find is when people make a lot of changes to the contract, or when there is a surprise, like, oh, by the way, I'm moving, or I got a new job and my new job is going to require you to pay X number of dollars in lost wages that you didn't anticipate. Those kinds of things always sour the mood and make the starting point of this relationship more contentious than I think it otherwise could have been had communication been better.
Right. Like, was this talked about prior to? And if it wasn't, like, I always tell intended parents, even something, I mean, obviously, like, food and nutrition and, like, all these things come up, right? Vitamins or vaccines. Like, if you have high-level questions, just ask me before, if you think it's something that, like, you really want during this journey, or a diet or whatever it is, because I am trying to make sure that when you get to legal, that's what happens, right? That it's, like, clear and understood, and that this is what is expected of her, or you guys have talked about this. Yes, she's willing to do this, or yes, she's willing to get this or take this vitamin. And I think, obviously sometimes things come up as the process moves along and maybe you just didn't talk about it. But I think even something simple just to ask, like, hey, are you willing to take these vitamins? Like, that's a conversation you have with your surrogate, right? So, I know, like, on the agency side, we try to make sure that obviously those surprises don't come up as well, you know, because sometimes you just don't know. But I say the legal process should be fairly quick, right? I mean, reviewing and everything is pretty standard. And that also goes back to choosing a surrogacy attorney where they know the industry norms, where everything is laid out and should be pretty standard.
Yeah, for the most part. I mean, I tend to say, show me who the attorney is on the other side, and I'll tell you how long it's going to take. Because that's usually how it goes, right?
Yeah.
It's like there are some people that make this unnecessarily difficult, I think, and then there are the majority of attorneys that understand are not going to make changes just because they like how it sounds better, right? It's like if it's substantive, they'll make the edit, and that's important. But we're not going to get a contract with 50 different pages of revisions that we now have to go through and tell ourselves a story about why is this being included?
Yeah.
What does this mean? What are they really trying to get at here? And that's what gets complicated is that, you know, when you see a lot of changes in an agreement, you start questioning, well, what's behind that? And then you start telling yourself a bunch of stories, and it just it creeps in a bunch of doubt.
100%. Yeah. 100%. So when a conflict happens mid-journey, how strong does the legal groundwork around that like outcome happen?
I mean, my advice to everybody that is beginning the process is I say, to the degree that you can avoid including the attorneys, you should. Because first of all, the surrogate's attorney only probably met her once or twice. They don't have a rapport with her. They don't have a relationship. They help this individual understand the agreement. And I'm not saying, you know, despite their best wishes and best efforts, they just don't have the same relationship that the agency does. The agency knows this girl, right? They've been with her. She trusts the agency. And so the agency's in a much better position to mediate these kinds of conflicts because they're in the position to be able to say, I think you're doing this wrong and I think you're doing this wrong. And so that's a much better way of reaching resolution than it is to have two lawyers who now owe a duty to their client to advocate for their best interests.
For something that might not be as big of a legal issue, potentially.
Right. Something that's not that big of a legal issue. But because lawyers, by definition, have a duty to their client. And so that means they're giving the most charitable argument that they can based on the facts, which does not yield good results. Because now I'm twisting words, they're twisting words, and we're trying to make it sound exactly like my client wants it to sound to be as favorable to them. And now it just increases the hostility, basically. So that's my first piece of advice is use your agency as a mediator because they have the best relationship with all of the parties in this process, and that is much better at managing most issues. Now, as far as if it has to escalate to the attorneys, then most of the issues are about, is this money owed? Like that's the kind of questions that we typically
Mostly
ask.
money.
Yeah, I mean the majority of the disputes are about, I'm being asked to pay lost wages, and I think that there should be better efforts to mitigate the amount that I'm supposed to pay or things like that, and what are my rights? And so, sometimes we have to go there and we get into those conversations, but, ultimately the lawyer's role is to help advise and guide. And, my mindset is, like I said, always keeping the relationship in mind. And so I'm understanding that we have an agreement and you want the outcome that you want, but let's also consider how our communications are potentially going to impact the relationship. Because in the end, wouldn't it be, I would think, wouldn't it be nice to have a warm, welcoming environment in the delivery room where everybody likes each other and gets along, and it wasn't really worth fighting over $500? Maybe to you it is. And I think it's a personality thing. And, I've over the years maybe been just softened a bit on these things, I suppose. But I think that sometimes you're better off taking a loss in your mind and preserving the relationship. But that's everyone's different. Everyone's own journey to take.
Yeah, I would agree with that. That I feel like, because it all comes down to the baby being born, right? And like what you envision, and like you want to be there, and you want it to be a happy situation. You know, is it worth it? I feel like is it worth it is probably a question that comes up a lot, honestly, because it sometimes it does seem very menial, like, okay, $500. $500 doesn't seem like a lot when you're spending the amount of money for surrogacy, but yeah, everyone's different.
Yeah, I mean, of course, it's easy to spend somebody else's money, and
Yeah.
I understand that, but yeah, I mean, I'll I I tend to find that most of the disputes are surrounding around money, and it's not always to say, yeah, just like pay to make the problem go away.
Right.
But sometimes the answer is the question is it worth it?
Yeah.
Do you just want to bend on this one and ask the agency to maybe in the future have your back or prevent this kind of thing from arising again, but let this one go in preservation of the relationship.
Yeah.
Or in furtherance of preservation.
Right. And a lot of that comes down to the contractual exhibit A for what is due to the surrogate. And maybe that, obviously that's usually what's put into place with obviously the trust account and whatnot. But, sometimes it gets gray, that's where you reach out and say, hey, are you willing to do this? Or, hey, this changed. Those are all just obviously conversations. But when somebody's being charged and not being communicated with, I think that probably where that comes from.
Yeah. I mean, most of it's black and white, right?
Yeah,
So it's not,
exactly.
not to undermine it. Like most of the financial terms are black and white.
Yeah.
But there are certain things where we have to defer to doctors, for example, to determine whether a person is eligible to recover lost wages. And sometimes the parents disagree, or sometimes the parents feel like, there's bad faith in it or whatever. And so like, do you want to pick that fight? Do you want to accuse the surrogate of bad faith? And if you do, then this is the path that we have to go down. But it's at that point the relationship's done, right? As soon as you tell somebody, I don't trust you, I think you're taking wages that you shouldn't. Just understand that you're torpedoing the good faith, and there's not going to be a warm, fuzzy relationship that persists beyond that.
Because once you break that trust, then how do you get that back?
Yeah, right. Yeah. So I mean, it's obviously every case is different and it's nuanced.
Totally.
But
Yeah.
I think that is the theme, and that's probably what makes surrogacy hard, is that you have these little decisions that you have to make.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, where it is gray.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So if someone is about to sign a surrogacy contract, what questions should they be asking the attorney, either on the surrogate or the IP side? And I feel like what you mentioned prior to, like the surrogate isn't going, most surrogates, I should say, aren't going out. They don't already know a lawyer that's going to be representing them, right? It's usually like, hey, we have these attorneys, please choose, which one you feel is best. But intended parents are usually looking for an attorney probably prior to, or maybe during the early stages. But obviously the surrogate still has questions maybe to ask, like once it comes up. So is there specific questions you would say, like, if you're looking at doing a surrogacy contract, or if you're going to be doing surrogacy, these are the questions you should be asking up front?
Oh man, well, there's so many.
I
know. I mean, I think honestly, this is why the agencies are so important.
Yeah.
Because by the time they've reached the attorney, there's so much that has already happened.
Unless someone reaches out to you early on.
Yeah, right. So, and to be fair, I can't recall a single situation where the surrogate reached out really early to say, like, I'm considering surrogacy and I have a lot of questions about how to protect myself. More likely it's going to be the parents, because they're wanting help, navigating agency contracts and things like that. So I don't necessarily have a great answer for that, because there's just too many, and it's a broad range of things that need to be addressed. So it's probably going to be circumstantial, depending on where they are in the process or the like. And then of course, when you're reading this 50-page surrogacy contract, there are plenty of pertinent questions that we have to go through.
Yeah. So I would say, like, questions that are going to come up are probably the ones like that we talked about, where it's like, where should I choose my surrogate? I'm here. Like, do you, suggest one? I feel like everybody always says California, just because we do this all the time and it just seems so easy. But that's, I can understand that, just because there are so many like changes and updates with law, and like sometimes you don't really know. But I know sometimes intended parents come to us and they're like, hey, I'm already working with Brian Klein's office as my attorney. I'm like, okay, cool. But they're like just starting out their journey. So, but maybe they had a donor or something. So, obviously everybody's situation is a little different.
Yeah.
So just to kind of like wrap up, which this has been great information, so I appreciate it. But what do you wish more people understood about the legal side of surrogacy? And I think we probably touched on this in the beginning, but maybe just to.
Yeah, I mean, I think the the biggest lesson to learn, I think the biggest thing to prep for is, I would just say, making sure that you understand your circumstances through the lens of the law, so that it's not to say it has to be a complex learning process for you. It's just that you need to know that you need to ask the question that I'm being matched with a surrogate and she lives in this state. Is that state suitable for me? Am I comfortable with the process? Am I comfortable with the laws or lack of laws in that state? Am I comfortable with the potential political situation that's going on, which is kind of a new topic for all of us? And so make sure that you're educated on those points from the very beginning, so that we're not trying to correct things or correct for things once you've reached the contract process. Like, oh my gosh, now I want my surrogate to move to my home state because I feel more comfortable. Like, that's not a good way to introduce that idea, right?
Yeah.
So I think that would be probably the most important takeaway for intended parents and surrogates is make sure you understand the process and you're comfortable with it before you begin this journey of matching and paying for screening and psych screening and committing to a surrogate.
And knowing what you're getting into before you get started.
And if you're international, how that impacts the process for you back home.
Right. And how to get back into your country.
Yeah, correct.
Right. Which you guys do help with, which is great. So, or you offer at least tools and ways to be able to do that.
Yeah, it's adding another piece of coordination. We have now an attorney in a different country that we're coordinating with and making sure that our process in the United States follows and flows, so that when they get back home, it's seamless and they have the best opportunity to, register their baby and be recognized as parents in their home country as well.
Yeah. Cool. Well, Brian, thank you so much for your expertise and your communication today. We really appreciate it. I know the intended parents and the surrogates appreciate it. So thank you guys so much for joining us today on the Surrogate Buzz. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment. We'll look forward to seeing you next time.